Good morning, Lenape, and welcome back to this week's episode of Lenape Live. I'm glad to be your host, Rachel Lawrence.
And I'm Jynx Roberta. It's Friday, May 10th, and we're back with an all-new episode.
Be sure to stick around, everyone, because this is Lenape Live.
2 weeks into May, and I have to say, I have been so busy. School, job interviews, Mother's Day planning, it's been tiring. Do you have any plans for Mother's Day or this weekend in general, Rachel?
I'm going to attempt to take my mom to a musical on Saturday, and then we're having Maggiano's with my whole family. What about you? What do you got going on this weekend?
I got reservations at Brio's for my mom and my aunt, but my cousin and I are trying to keep it a surprise, so we're keeping it under wraps. And let's move on to today's announcements. Fellowship of Christian Athletes is now meeting every day 3 during Lunch and Learn and A100. Feel free to come be a part of something bigger.
Attention seniors, prom tickets will now be sold in person. On Monday and Tuesday next week, tickets will be sold in the LGI during Lunch and Learn. Tickets are $70 and you can pay in cash, check, credit, or debit card. Check the Class of 2024 Google Classroom for details or contact Ms. Dimmig or Mr. Mack. And of course, check the Lenape homepage for more announcements.
This week, it was Teacher Appreciation Week, and each morning we heard lovely messages from you to our amazing teachers. Max walked around the halls for even more shout outs for our amazing staff.
To Mr. Curcio,
Mr. Meany,
Coach Mack,
Mr. Eastlick,
Miss Stans.
Shout out to Miss Lord.
Shout out to Woods.
shout out Ms. Zoe,
Shout out to Mr. Meany. He's the best history teacher ever.
Foley,
Miss Zoe!
Shout out Miss Flake.
Miss Washington,
Ms. Washington,
Miss Hart, Mr. Knoll.
shout out Mr. Rich, shout out Mr. Carnavale,
Mr. Eastlick.
Shout out to Miss Bashu.
Yo, shout out Mr. Einbinder, shout out Miss Wolf, shout out Mr. Moore.
shout out to Miss Nelson,
I'd like to shout out Miss O.
Mrs. Fresh,
Mr. Fardella,
Miss Patterson,
Miss Cummins.
Miss Hillman.
Shout out to Mr. Waldorf.
Shout out Miss Donaldson.
Miss Lord. Shout out to Mr. Love and Miss Toth.
shout out to Mr. Porco, you're awesome,
Shout out to Mr. Jenkins, Mr. Condorsa, and Mr. Scott.
Mr. McInerney.
Bussarello,
I appreciate Mr. Harvey.
Shout out Miss Flake.
Shout out JP.
Mr. Porco.
Shout out Mr. Porco.
to Mr. Curcio,
Shout out Joseph Porco.
Shout out to Miss Geisler and Miss Wolf.
Miss Stickle and Mr. Bausch.
And Miss Geisler, thank you.
Porco and Timko,
Shout out to Miss Dimmick and Mr. Tambrillo and Mr. Wagner.
Miss Tyson, Mr. Nicastro, and Miss Seneschal.
Miss Hubbard,
Mr. Meany.
shout out to Miss Geisler,
Shout out Miss Geisler.
Miss Geisler.
Mr. Waldorf.
Mr. Waldorf.
Miss Gapehart and Miss Lord.
Mr. Better.
Mrs. Hildman,
Miss Mullen.
Every staff member in Lenape.
Fact, teachers are cool, but every high school student can name one teacher who they think is just a little cooler than the rest. This is the chance to highlight those special educators. WMMR Coolest Teacher Contest is for Lenape High School today. So take out your phones and text teacher to 39333 to get the link to vote for who you think is Lenape's coolest teacher. Now on May 15th, prepare for the district boys lacrosse matchup between the Cherokee Chiefs and your Lenape Indians. Here's a quick promo to get you hyped for today's game.
That looked pretty cool, but the last lacrosse game I went to, it was like 85 degrees outside. And then the one before that, there was literally frost on the ground. We cannot predict this weather recently, but our friends at Lenape Lookout can get pretty close. Rachel, what are we looking at for next week?
Welcome back to Lenape Lookout, sponsored by the Meteorology Club. This week's weather has been very different compared to last week. We had a thunderstorm, and next week should continue to see some rain. Mother's Day, of course, is forecasted to be the rainiest and coldest day of the week. This has been Lenape Lookout. Now, last Saturday, Star Wars fans like myself celebrated May 4th, as in May the 4th be with you. Like May the Force be with you. It's a Star Wars joke. Here's Ryan Antonoff and Dan Baker's lightsaber battle scene, right out of the Star Wars universe.
I am the darkness in which all life dies. All life exists simply to sacrifice itself to
You know what? Teachers do so much for us, and as we wrap up Teacher Appreciation Week, I thought a few extra shout-outs would be incredible for these teachers.
I appreciate Miss Dean.
I appreciate you, Sergeant Mondelli.
I appreciate you, Mr. Guitar.
I appreciate you, Singer Hart.
I appreciate you, Mr. Lopez.
I appreciate you, Miss Mo.
I appreciate you, Miss Lord.
We appreciate you, Stans.
I appreciate you, Miss A.
I appreciate you, Mr. Porco.
I appreciate you, Mr. E. and Miss Sarah.
I appreciate you, Miss New.
I appreciate you, Mr. Guitar.
I appreciate you, Miss Bus. I love you so much. And Miss Hart. And Miss Hart.
Okay, I appreciate Mr. Evison.
I appreciate Miss Dimming.
I appreciate Miss Nelson.
Appreciate you, Miss Cashman. We love you. And I appreciate Miss Francois.
I appreciate Miss Washington.
I appreciate you, Miss Timko.
I appreciate you, Mr. Meany.
I love you, Miss Cashman.
I appreciate you, Miss Easlick.
I appreciate you, Miss Timko.
Same.
I appreciate you, Eric Toscano, and Mr. Meter.
We appreciate you, Miss Flake. We appreciate you, Mr. Evison.
I appreciate you, Mr. Franchi.
We appreciate Mr. Meany.
I appreciate Miss Patterson.
I appreciate Miss Cashman and Miss Cummins.
And with that, thank you all for tuning into this week's episode of Lenape Live.
Make sure to keep with us on Instagram at Lenape Digital Media, and be sure to stop by ND25 to see how you can be involved with our show.
We've been Jynx and Rachel for the last time, and we'll be back with an all-new episode next Friday, May 17th. Until then, have a great weekend, Lenape.